Hi, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. I want to try and get to 1 million subscribers. Thank you. This case takes place in the United Kingdom in the year 2010. A mate crime is an offence committed by people who are thought to be friends of the victim. It is common in cases where vulnerable people are placed into dangerous settings, either by their own accord or through the neglect of others. Meet Gemma Hayter. Gemma was born on the 13th of September 1982 in the town of Rugby in the United Kingdom. Gemma was the youngest of 3 siblings, and she grew up with her mother, Sue Prince, along with her stepfather. Her biological father left when she was just 9. Her mother Sue says that Gemma was full of character when she was born. She was very loving and always in need of affection. Gemma had an older sister named Nikki. Nikki said that Gemma was lots of fun growing up, as you never knew what she was going to do next. She was chaotic and a handful, but was extremely fun. Nikki believed that her little sister was hilarious. As Gemma grew, Sue had a feeling that there was something different about her. She was unlike any of her previous children, and not like any other child she had ever met. Along with this, it was clear that Gemma had some particularly distinctive physical features. She displayed the physical appearance of someone with a congenital disorder, otherwise known as a birth defect. And so Sue took her daughter to a specialist so they could test Gemma's chromosomes for any anomalies. However, despite suspicions, the tests revealed that Gemma had no genetic abnormalities. The schools that Gemma attended echoed this, insisting that she was, quote, normal. Her primary and middle school said that she was coping well. This was very confusing for the family, as her sister and mother both knew that she couldn't do what the other kids could do. By age 11, she was entering high school. It was clear that she behaved younger than other children of her age, so Sue kept taking Gemma to specialists for help, but the specialists believed that she was just being an attention seeker. But when Gemma reached her teenage years, there was a shift in her behaviour. Gemma became very reluctant to wash herself and clean. Soap was almost out of the picture every bath time, and she never liked to brush her teeth. Usually, personal hygiene and vanity comes naturally to teenagers, but not with Gemma. Meanwhile, at school, the divide between Gemma and her fellow pupils was growing and becoming more and more noticeable. Despite not still having a diagnosis, Sue took Gemma out of school at 14 and placed her in a school for people with learning difficulties. For Gemma, this was great. She was amongst pupils who she could relate to more, and she started making some friends. Gemma was loving life, and she was getting the additional assistance she needed, although her family did continue to struggle with getting her the correct help beyond her education. Between the ages of 13 and 19, Gemma had 29 contacts with learning difficulties and care services, but there was never a definitive diagnosis. In December of 2001, Gemma was 19 years old and was defined as an adult, and so she was assessed by Adult Social Care. The outcome of this assessment was that she had conduct disorder, which meant that she was entitled to further education at a residential college where she could also live. This accommodation was provided by a separate charity called Mayday Trust. In September of 2004, and whilst in the support accommodation, Gemma alleged that someone forced themselves upon her and went all the way. However, the police investigation concluded that there was not enough evidence to prosecute the perpetrator, who was also a resident of the same accommodation. Mayday Trust intervened to try and have her moved to another location. However, a social worker believed that she did not meet the necessary requirements for continued care, so she was not permitted assisted living. This came without a formal and official assessment. Adult Social Care tried to house Gemma in Bedworth, but she refused the accommodation and care as it was just too far away from Rugby, which is where she lived. Gemma began being uncooperative with the care agencies as she was just so frustrated. During this time, and until late 2006, no risk assessments or adult safeguarding measures were ever conducted, paving the way for the tragic events that soon followed. In 2006, the local council organised a meeting with Gemma to assess whether she had the ability to live on her own. The assessor concluded that Gemma could live on her own. Gemma's family was horrified and confused. As for Gemma, she wanted her independence. But Gemma struggled to work to pay rent due to her disabilities, and she was placed in social housing. She was given a flat in a 10-story concrete tower in a council estate in Rugby. Her family was outraged, believing the building was unsuitable. They were expecting assisted living with full-time carers. It was no secret that the council estate she was placed in housed many residents with difficult backgrounds. This included ex-convicts with violent or drug-related histories and addicts. Gemma's family were worried about her safety, as she was incredibly trusting, naive, and very unaware of the risks around her. This situation felt like a disaster waiting to happen. A local post office worker named Dawn would later speak about Gemma. Dawn would cash her social security checks on Tuesdays. She said that Gemma was a lovely girl, totally innocent and almost childlike, but she also expressed concerns about Gemma's hygiene. The conditions in Gemma's flat wasn't known to her family at first, as she would always come down to meet visitors, rather than taking them to her flat. But Gemma's mother would later describe her flat as a pigsty. Gemma's flat was very chaotic. She would collect used cigarette butts from the street floors to make roll-ups, smoking them in her flat. She had a love for animals, so she bought a hamster and a cockatiel named Jasmine. All of this, combined with a lack of personal hygiene, meant that her flat smelled so bad that it engulfed the entire floor, according to the locals. One of the people who lived in this council estate was a 56-year-old man named Martin. Martin took pity on Gemma after speaking with her. He invited her into his house for some food and noticed that she ate every crumb. She even used her thumb to clean the plate, showing that she wasn't eating properly. However, it wasn't her table manners that disturbed him. It was what she revealed about her personal life. Gemma had been using online dating apps, describing herself as big, bold, and beautiful, attracting various men to her flat. Martin was deeply concerned and saw her as vulnerable. He described her having the mental capacity of a 4-year-old. He recounted giving her £10 for milk, expecting change, only for her to return with milk and £9 worth of sweets. Martin also noticed that Gemma had some friends, but he believed that these so-called friends were taking advantage of her. Evidence suggests that Gemma had befriended several drug dealers and was holding crack, cocaine, and heroin in her flat, but she had no clue. These drugs were wrapped up in boxes, and the dealers said that they were presents for their friends, and Gemma, of course, believed them. By 2010, her life spiraled further, and this left her exposed and vulnerable to people that she thought were her friends. Now we can meet her so-called friends. Chantel Booth, aged 21, and her partner, Daniel Newstead, aged 20, along with their neighbours, Jessica Lyons and Joe Boyer, aged 17 and 18, and lastly, a 19-year-old boy named Duncan Edwards. Chantel Booth had a chaotic and troubled life. By 2010, she had lost custody of her 2 children due to being deemed unfit to parent. One of the children was removed directly due to her criminal record. This included a conviction for grievous bodily harm. She had a community order with supervision, a curfew, and training requirements because of this. She was also convicted of common assault in May of 2010. The victim was a female. Her partner, Daniel, was also violent and controlling, and he frequently assaulted her. Despite their toxic relationship, they lived together in a flat. Daniel had a history of violence, having assaulted his mother, sister, and former girlfriends. He was very well known to the police. Daniel had previously been convicted of a fray. During this violent incident, he wielded a metal bar and a knife. In June of 2010, Chantel and Jessica were allegedly involved in bullying and assaulting a vulnerable woman in a hostel. Jessica Lyons was known in school for her aggression and as someone to avoid. She too had a child removed from her custody due to her violent actions. She was prone to violent outbursts and she faced multiple assault charges, but was only cautioned avoiding conviction. She lived in a flat with her boyfriend Joe, in the same block as Chantel and Daniel. Joe was unlike the others. He had no violent record, but he wasn't a stranger to breaking the law, having been warned twice for illegal substance possession. The group was completed by Duncan, a friend of the four. Duncan had a history of crime, with 9 convictions. Gemma's family soon became aware of Chantel and saw her as one of Gemma's friends, and then they were slowly introduced to the others. However, Chantel and the other friends came across well when the family was around, but this was all about to change. The group were taking advantage of Gemma. One of them would always accompany her to the post office when she went to collect her social security allowance. Gemma didn't have the ability to determine that what was happening was bad. On the 7th of August 2010, Gemma and the 2 couples along with Duncan decided to head out into the town of Rugby for drinks. When the group arrived at one bar, a doorman asked Chantel for her identification. Gemma, being the oldest, found it funny and made a joke saying that Chantel was 15. The doorman couldn't forget what he heard. As a result, the group was refused entrance. Chantel was furious with Gemma, saying that she had ruined her night. Chantel turned to Gemma and pushed her away from the door. Jessica then slapped her in the face. The others laughed at what had just happened. With this, the night ended, and the group eventually headed home. The next day, in the early evening of Sunday the 8th of August 2010, Gemma asked Chantel if she could go round to her flat to pick up her bag. Gemma had left it there the night before. When Chantel accepted, she told Gemma that Jessica, Joe and Duncan were also present and that they were all having Sunday lunch. Gemma then decided that she didn't want to go round due to the violence she experienced the night before. She was likely scared, but the group persuaded her to go round. Shortly after Gemma arrived, the group broke out into a heated discussion. This discussion was over where a £5 note had gone. The blame swiftly turned towards Gemma, possibly due to resentment carried over from the night before. Gemma did not steal the £5 note. In fact, Gemma found it tucked behind the fridge. This whole experience triggered Chantel. Chantel brought up an incident which occurred 2 years before, where she believed that Gemma had stolen £800 from her. Gemma denied both of these allegations, the £5 and the £800. There was no evidence to even suggest that Gemma had committed either crimes against her friends. But this changed the dynamics in the room. Chantel got progressively upset. In response, Daniel stepped up and started to physically confront Gemma. He began grabbing some pillows and whacking her over the head. But Daniel wasn't the only person in the room with a love interest in Chantel. Duncan and Chantel had been secretly flirting with each other over text messages, and Duncan saw this as an opportunity to show support to the girl he liked. And so, like Daniel, he picked up several pillows and started hitting Gemma over the head. If you have watched my channel for some time, you will know that these kinds of cases start with a minor act of aggression, but with the support of others, the situation turns increasingly violent, often in a shockingly violent speed. Next, Joe and Duncan urinated into a can, and they forced Gemma to drink it. The situation then further escalated. Jessica grabbed a mop from the kitchen and jabbed the handle into the face of Gemma. When Gemma was dazed and unable to focus on what had happened, Duncan grabbed the mop off Jessica and started mocking Gemma, waving it around in her face as if she couldn't see. Chantel then walked over to Gemma and administered a vicious and brutal headbutt, which broke Gemma's nose. At this stage, Daniel had left the flat. He later claimed that he was going to help Gemma. However, when he returned to the flat, he saw blood from Gemma's nose on his bedroom floor. and in response, he hit Gemma in the face. This time, it wasn't with pillows, it was with his fists. He dealt 2 blows. This violence continued for hours, where the group hit her head off a big industrial-style radiator. This must have been done over and over again, as the blood was sprayed across the floor and the walls. This onslaught broke her nose in more places, which must have been unbelievably painful. The group then locked her in an ensuite bathroom and wrapped tape around her mouth so nobody could hear her cries. They held her there whilst they figured out what to do next. They then put Gemma's mobile phone down the toilet, and several hours went by. Gemma must have been in disbelief and excruciating pain. Later that evening, the group unlocked the bathroom, took the tape off her face, and told her they were going to walk her home. Gemma likely would have been relieved, and she believed them. The group left the flat and started making their way through Rugby Town on foot. The 5 were dressed mostly in tracksuits, with hoods up covering their faces. Jessica wore a cap and was making sure her face was pointed down. Gemma followed the gang carrying a white carrier bag, the very same one she had gone round to Chantel's for. She also kept wiping blood from her nose as it ran profusely. As she followed, she still believed that she was being led home. It was in the general direction of where she lived, and Duncan appeared to kindly save her part of his cigarette. She had no reason to suspect what was about to happen. It was now gone midnight and in the early hours of the 9th of August 2010. CCTV footage shows Gemma walking slowly to a stop on Hillmorton Road, unable to walk further, likely due to the pain she was experiencing. Or was this because she didn't feel safe any longer? The gang continued to lure Gemma to a secluded stretch of footpath formed from a disused railway line, out of view of the CCTV. Once on the old railway verges, the group had to go left to Gemma's flat. She was likely relieved that she was nearly home, but the group led her right instead of left. They went deeper down the dark and empty path. As they walked down the old dark railway, one of them placed a bin bag around Gemma's head. Gemma was panicked and she tried to fight back and free her head, but the group quickly continued the assault they had started at the flat, and they began kicking her in the face repeatedly. They stomped on her face and neck, leaving footprints. Amongst the attack, they stripped her naked in a ploy to cause humiliation, and eventually the gang began to hack into her neck with a knife. This would have been extremely painful. However, it wasn't over yet. The stab wounds were not deep enough to cause a fatal blow. Instead, the group left her on the floor naked, partially wrapped up in a bin bag. They had beaten her unconscious. The group collected Gemma's clothing before leaving, and Duncan was responsible for burning the evidence. Gemma was left cold, beaten, and alone. After some time, Gemma began to choke on her own blood from her nose. That night, Gemma drowned in her own blood just moments later. The group of 5 was then seen walking back through the town on CCTV, this time without Gemma. Later on, a member of the public was taking a morning run besides the railway. At approximately 5:30 a.m, they spotted the naked, badly beaten body of Gemma Hayter. A call was made to the police, which commenced an investigation led by Detective James Essex. It didn't take long for the body to be identified. The investigation progressed quickly. The police soon became aware of Gemma's friendship with Chantel. When they went through Gemma's text messages with Chantel, it was clear to the police that the two were very close. In the messages, there was evidence of her taking advantage of Gemma. She often referred to Gemma as the name Down syndrome. As suspicions mounted, Chantel and her partner Daniel were brought in for questioning in connection with Gemma's murder. The couple quickly caved under the pressure and began blaming each other and the other 3 for the despicable acts towards Gemma. Once the other three were questioned, they all made the picture of what happened very clear, and all of the gang were at fault. All 5 of them were swiftly arrested. The trial began in July of 2011 at Warwick Crown Court. The first day of the trial is remembered as the worst day in Nikki's life. The day was the first time that she had found out what truly happened to her little sister, and she heard everything in great detail. It was truly horrific. Meanwhile, the defendants were not taking the trial seriously. They didn't think that murdering Gemma was wrong. They thought it was only Gemma, a truly dehumanizing statement. The entire group did not show a single ounce of regret or remorse. On the 28th of July 2011, the verdict was given. The group were all found guilty of the murder. The group had some time in jail before the sentencing to reflect. Joe made use of this time and wrote the following: "I can't wait to get sentenced now and go to a proper jail for life. They sound sick, bro. Keys to my door, PlayStation and DVD. I get to go to town with a screw in normal clothes. I get to go to McDonald's, the cinema and Nando's, and wherever else I want." The sentencing began on the 12th of September 2011. The judge described Chantel as a nasty piece of work, noting that Gemma had considered her a best friend. The judge remarked, "Over the years, you treated Gemma like a toy to be picked up and put down. I suspect on whether there was a gap in your miserable life for her to fill." Chantel was sentenced to a minimum term of 21 years in prison. Daniel received at least 20 years, while Joe was ordered to serve a minimum term of 16 years for the murder. Jessica and Duncan were convicted of manslaughter and were sentenced to 13 and 15 years. Gemma slipped through the cracks of the child care services, educational services, and adult care services, and finally met her end in the most horrific of ways. A lifetime of mistreatment was not what she deserved.